Baruch Hashem. Today's parasha is Sefer Devarim, a book of Deuteronomy, and also we begin the entire book of Devarim, which is actually called the Rabbi's Mishnah Torah, the repetition of the Torah, the second Torah, even though there are some significant changes. For today's study session, I want to use a work that I found in Rabbi Minta's library, such a treasure. I love to use the works because it keeps the neshama vibrant with us. And it's a chumash with the explanation of the Midrash Halacha. And so it's called Chumash in Biur Midrash Halacha. And we're going to go right into it. So basically, the Midrash Halacha is the different Midrashim on the Parasha, and it's by Rav Yechiel Michal Stern, who's a Rav in the Ezra's Torah neighborhood of Jerusalem. So let's go to the parasha, and he basically cites a midrash halacha for each one, which the midrash halacha is a midrash, but a halachic midrash, and he gives his explanation of it. So we start with the first verse, Eila Devarim, chapter 1, verse 1 of Deuteronomy. Eila Devarim, these are the words Asher Diber Moshe al Kol Yisrael, that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. The Avar Yarden, on the other side of the Jordan River, Bamidbar in the wilderness, Barava in the plains, Mol Suf opposite the swamp, Ben Paranu, Ben Tofel, Vilavan Vachatzerot, V'di Zahab. So what are these places? So Rashi says that these places, we don't know what they are, or not all of them, but therefore we list some, we say them elliptically so that when the rebuke comes, the rebuke is done in a more respectful manner. But the Rabbi Yechiel Michal Stern in this Biur Halacha, in this Midrashim, he cites first the Tosefta from the Tractate Sota, chapter 7. And so what's the Tosefta that he cites? Because this Tosefta cites this verse. It says, Shema Yomer Adam Medaito. Maybe a person will say in his own mind, Oh, Beis Shammai metamin, Beis Hillel metarin. Since Beis Shammai says it's ritually impure, and Beis Hillel says it's ritually pure. Ish poni oser, ish poni matir. One person prohibits the other, and the other person permits it. Meaning, so yeah, there's always two opinions to everything. Meaning to say, why should I bother learning Torah? There's two people who argue about every single thing. What's the point of me studying? One person says it's okay, the other one says not. They argue about every single thing. Is there even any point to it? Meaning to say, it says in the portion in the book begins. It could have just said Devarim, but since it says Hadvarim and Eila Hadvarim, it means it's said in triplicate. It means to say that there are many, many different words that come out from the Torah. Kol Hadvarim Natnu Miroa Echad. All the different parts of the Torah, even though they're in many ways contradictory, competing with each other, they're conflicting with each other. Nevertheless, Kulam Kel Echad Varan. All of them were created by one God. Parnes Echad Nitanan. One leader gave them. Ribon Kol Amasim Baruchu Amran. The master of all deeds said them. Afata Selibcha Chadre Chadarim. Also make your heart to be the room within the rooms, and include Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, both words, the words of Tameh and the words of Tahor. So this is such a powerful Tosefta to start the book of Devarim, and in fact, the book of Devarim itself has many contradictions with the other books of the Torah, and so the Tosefta is citing the book of Devarim. So it's ironic But Tosefta, basically, for me to summarize it and then repeat it for you, Tosefta is saying, let's say a person sees these conflicting opinions in the Torah and then says, well, why should I bother studying them? And then one person says, okay, the other one says, not okay. What's the point in doing all this? So we say, no, the words Eila Ha-Devarim, these are the words, but it's said in a manner which means that it can fulfill multiple possibilities. That teaches us this idea that all of the words of the Torah, all the different opinions were said by one God, one master of the universe, one shepherd. And so if God could say multiple different things, we could find within our heart to allow for the opinions both of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel to be within our heart. So he has a little bit of a discussion of this idea. This is known sometimes colloquially as the idea of Elu ve'elu, these and these are the words of the living God. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Hayim. He has a little bit of an explanation about that here, citing some, let's say, some sources that are not as well known. So the Ritva and Eruvin 13b discusses how is it possible that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel can both be correct. They can both be the words of the living God when one says it's prohibited and the other one says it's permitted. So the Ritva says, how's it possible that they can both be the words of God? If one is, it should be a zero-sum game. One says it's okay, one says not okay, one says allowed, one says not allowed. So the Ritva lived in Spain. He answers in the name of the Rabbanei Tzarfat, in the name of the French rabbis, that when Moses went up to the heavens to receive the Torah, God showed him for every single word, this is Eila Advarim, these are the words, God showed him for every single word 49 ways to make it prohibited and 49 ways to make it permitted. And he asked God about that. And God said to him that it was given over to the V'sha'al HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hazeh. He asked God about this. And God said that this was given over to the sages of Israel in every generation, that they will and they will be the ones to decide. So there are 40, for every single thing, there are 49 different ways to permit, 49 ways to prohibit. And the stages of each generation are the ones who get to decide. And this is what God told Moshe. And in fact, the Shlach Kodesh, we mentioned the Shlach on Shabbos that Elaine, who's not here, said that Howie was a descendant of the Shlach. They always visit his grave. He says that this is hinted to in the words Pikudei Hashem Isharim. And this hints to the fact that it's all deposited. And basically every generation is going to come and take out the ideas that are already hidden and were already given up at Sinai. So now we have another question. In this context, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked the question that let's say a person wakes up in the morning and they say, we want to learn the opinion of Beit Shammai. So if a person wakes up in the morning and says, okay, I want to learn what Beit Shammai says. Now, we don't rule like Beit Shammai. We always say that the ruling decision is like Beit Hillel. But before we study Torah, we have to say the 3 blessings in the morning that are the blessings on the Torah. So Moshe Feinstein writes, when a person wakes up in the morning, he needs to, and he wants to study the opinion of Beit Shammai and go into depth and analyze it. First, he needs to say the blessing, because even though we don't rule like that, these are the words of the Torah. And indeed, in Eruvin, it says that a heavenly voice went out and said, this and this is the words of the living God, even though the law is like Beis Hillel. So in that case, we follow the heavenly voice. This is a question actually we had in today's Daf Yomi. Today's Daf Yomi, we're discussing about fish. We're saying that fish, what are the signs of a kosher fish? Do people know what the signs of a kosher fish? I'm sure some people are going to say what the signs of a kosher fish is. Anybody know what the signs of a kosher fish? Anybody there want to say? Okay, so the kosher fish has fins and scales. Correct. Hold on one second.
Gills and scales. Fins and scales.
No, it's fins. So basically, it's Pir V'Kaskesses, fins and scales. But our Mishnah, but our Gemara in today's daf, he only said there's also actually the primary source is the that there's something else, that it's the head and the spine, that a non-kosher fish will not have a head, that a non-kosher fish will not have a rounded head, it will have a pointy head, and it will have no spine. And practically speaking, we follow the fins and scales, but those other signs are also relevant. And the Gemara tells, the medieval commentaries have a story about a Hagos Ashri, that there was a medieval Ashkenazic authority that he wanted to rule that the batuta, I think was a kosher fish, but then in the middle of the night he had a dream that it wasn't kosher, and he got up and he ruled on the basis of the dream that we could no longer eat it. And so they said, how can you paskin on the basis of how can you paskin on the basis of like an insight from heaven? And so one of the sources that you can rule on the basis of insight from heaven is this ruling from Talmud and Eruvin, which says that a heavenly voice came out and said, these and these are the words of the living God, and even nevertheless, the law is like Beis Hillel. So some, however, challenge this. They say, since we're saying that the laws are like Beis Shammai, why do we have to bother studying the position of Beis Hillel? So one second, let me just finish this statement from the Irim Me'edios, and he explains that since everything Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is what they learned from Shammai and Avtali and their teachers, and so therefore they're basically just passing down this tradition, and so therefore it doesn't matter if that's not the ruling law. That's almost irrelevant. The basic point here is that this is Torah and we need to study. So it doesn't even matter what the actual rule is. That's almost irrelevant to the conversation. Most of the time we study Gemara, most people who study Gemara don't really always look for the halacha. That the more advanced you are, you just want to study the essence of what they're saying and not necessarily know the actual ruling. So it almost doesn't even matter who the rule is like for our practical purposes of study, for our actual purposes of study. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, so now the Torah, the pasuk tells us, we go to verse 8, it says, on the other side of the Jordan River, Be'ever Yarden, Be'er, Be'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab, Hohil Moshe, either Moshe began or Moshe desired, Be'eretz HaTorah Azos Morash, says he began, other commentary says it means he desired, he began to explain this Torah. Rashi says, what does it mean he began to explain this Torah? He explained the Torah to the Jewish people in 70 languages, So here too, the Sefer cites the work, the Midrash Tanchuma from Deuteronomy chapter 2. Be'eres HaTorah Azos, the Midrash says, Besof Arba'im Shana, at the end of 40 years, Sheyatzu Yisrael Mitzrayim, after the Jewish people left Egypt, Hitchil Mefaresh HaTorah B'Shivim Lashon. He began to explain the Torah in 70 languages. So after Moshe left, 40 years after he left Egypt, he began to explain this Torah in 70 languages. And we were just talking about prayer in any language. And you see from here in the Torah that the Torah was explained in 70 languages. Be'eres HaTorah Azos, what does it mean? He began to explain this Torah. HaPesha Amar, O Ish Dvarim Anochi, Amar Ela HaDvarim. So the Midrash points out that this mouth that had said, I am not a man of words. Moses, when he spoke to God for the first time, says, Lo ish dvarim anochi, I am not a man of words. Now he says, these are the words. He was the one who explained the Torah in 70 languages, even though he was the one who first started saying, I am not a man of words. And the Midrash highlights his contrast between now he said, these are the words. So he became the definition of the words. His work is called Devarim. He is the person, the man who said, I am not a man of Devarim. He became the Devarim. He became the words. He became He's the epitome of somebody who turned their weakness into a strength. So we'll see the commentary on this. Some beautiful commentary it's here on this. He says the Maharsha writes that hold on. The Maharsha writes that Hebrew was beyond these 70 languages. There were 70 languages in addition to Hebrew. And it says Be'er Tev, he explained it well in 70 languages, because the Torah itself is Lashon HaKodesh. So the Torah itself is the Hebrew, and the Be'er, the explanation, is in the 70 languages. And so and this explains, what are these 70 languages that he explained it into? This corresponds to the 70 nations of the world, the 70 angels of the nations of the world. And the Jewish people are, according to the Midrash, directly under the providence of God. And so too Hebrew is directly under the providence of God. And the Torah was given in the Hebrew language. So the Tosfos writes that Joseph was speaking Hebrew. Joseph first tested Pharaoh. He connected to Pharaoh by speaking to him in all the 70 languages. And then Joseph spoke in Hebrew, and Pharaoh didn't understand it. Meaning to say that there are 70 languages aside from Hebrew. And we also say in this other idea of 70 also appears in Tractate Sukkot, where it talks in Tractate Masechah Sukkah, where it talks about the 70 cows that they brought on the holiday of Sukkot. And that corresponds to the 70 nations of the world, and not counting the Jewish people. So we see from here that the 70 languages that we're supposed to explain the Torah in, that's beyond the requirement to explain it in Hebrew, because Hebrew it is. So there's an absolute requirement built into the Torah to explain the Torah to the world, to explain it in all the languages of the world. And that's what Moshe began to do here. Moshe began at this point to say the Torah in all 70 languages. So Moshe also knew all the languages. How many people today know 70 languages? Well, now we know infinite languages. Just put into Google Translate. So now there's the question, do you fulfill the mitzvah of studying the Torah if you study the Torah in other languages? So he writes, he says that which we learn from the rabbis. He says basically the Raavad has a little bit of a disagreement. He says that everybody knows that the Torah was only written in Hebrew, and the other languages were just written not at this point, but on the stones in Gilgal. Meaning to say, when it was crossed over in the time of Joshua, there the Torah was written in all 70 languages on those stones over there. But the Raavad, so therefore the Raavad is of the opinion that Moshe was not saying it here in all the 70 languages. So therefore this phrase refers to, according to the Raavad, means that Moshe was teaching to the Jewish people. He wasn't saying it in 70 languages, but rather he was teaching it to them in a way that was fitting or appropriate to them. He was teaching to them the words of the teachings of God on the Torah, the oral Torah. So according to Raavad, who is a minority opinion, he says there's a special mitzvah of Gisa bo yomim v'layla, studying Torah day and night, and for that one has to try to push ourselves to study it in the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language was, of course, I once read a comment by Leon Wieselter. He said he thinks that the recreation, the renaissance of the modern day Hebrew language was an even greater miracle than the founding of the state of Israel. I think that's an exaggeration, but there's no question about it that the Hebrew language, the renaissance of the Hebrew language today, is in itself a tremendous miracle. That as a spoken language, it was basically that it existed as a rabbinic language, writing, but as a spoken language was basically dead. And now today it's a tremendous renaissance. It's a very, very rich language. But this is a resurrection of the dead with respect to the Hebrew language. And when I was growing up in our schools, in the Jewish schools, they didn't think it was important for us to learn modern Hebrew. But every Jewish school today, I think, assumes that in order to be a Jew in the world today, to be conversing with majority of the Jewish community, you need to know how to speak Hebrew. You need to know modern Hebrew to be able to really participate in the Jewish world. The Zohar writes that God in Parashas Noach, it says during the generation of the dispersion, the Zohar says that God mixed up the nations of the world, mixed up all their languages, and removed from the nations of the world the Hebrew language, because as long as they spoke Hebrew, then they were able to do miracles. And so basically, he talks about the holiness of the Hebrew language. There are some people who are very strict; they speak only in Hebrew. They never say any word that's not in Hebrew, or certainly on Shabbos, they'll speak only words that are only in Hebrew. Anyway, this is the idea about the holiness of the Hebrew language. Okay, so now we go to the next verse to talk about. It says, chapter 1, verse 8, Moshe says, look, I gave before you, Re'ei natati lifnechem. Okay, this is going to be a little emotional for some people, but I'm going to share it. He says, behold, I've given to you before you the land. Come, come and inherit the land. That God has sworn to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To give to them, and to their descendants after them. So says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that the Gemara in Sanhedrin, verse page 90b, says that this is a source for the resurrection of the dead. Because, says Rabbi Simai, how do we know that there's this idea of resurrection of the dead from the Torah? Because it says, I have upheld my covenant to give to them the land of Canaan. It doesn't say to you, but to them. We see from here that God is going to resurrect Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and give to them the land of Canaan. Not to you, but to them. So from here, says the Talmud, we see that the idea of resurrection of the dead is in the Torah. Because the resurrection of the dead is not explicitly listed. This is the source. The Talmud gives many other sources there, but this is one of the sources for the resurrection of the dead. So he has a little bit of a discussion here of the resurrection of the dead. So he takes up 3 questions. 1, where's everybody going to live when everybody gets resurrected? Is there going to be space for everybody? Number 2, how will it work? And let's say there's a woman who's married to multiple men. What's going to happen? Who's she going to come back with? It's going to be a little confusing. A few people in the apartment, as they say. So a few people in the kitchen. So first he asked this question: since everybody's going to be resurrected, how will there be space for everybody? So Rav Sajid discussed this in his classic work, Sefer Munos Vadeos, and also the Mabit discusses it, and the Midrash Tanchuma says as follows: even though in the future I will make I'll make a mark on all those people from Adam until everybody will be resurrected, and I'll say where they're going to stand, and they're going to say they have no space, and I'll say, come close to me, and I'll show you what I'll do for them, and I'll make space. So basically, the Midrash in Parashat Tzav says, don't worry about it. God is going to expand the world to make space for everybody. But then we have another problem with the resurrection of the dead. The other problem with the resurrection of the dead is that there's something called Gilgul Nishamot, that the souls go through. A big Kabbalistic idea is that a soul will come back in multiple life forms. So it's called reincarnation. So if that's the case, the soul is going to come back into which body? Excuse me. How is that going to work? So the Tzlach and Brachos, Noda Yehuda writes that if in the time of the resurrection, after there's reincarnation, and one soul can come back into multiple different bodies, and so if that's the case, what will happen in the time of the resurrection of the dead? And he doesn't give us an answer to how that will explain, but he says the Zohar discusses this very question. And now it comes to the third problem we don't understand. These are all mysteries upon mysteries, shrouded in the deepest chambers of Kabbalah. He says, what about a woman who's married to multiple men? How is she going to be resurrected? Does she get to choose which one she gets to come back with? So he brings down from the Sefer Anitzachon about a woman who was married to more than one man. and in the future when there'll be a resurrection. So he answers. Anybody want to guess which one she's going to go with? The first one, the second one, or the third one? Let's say there's a woman married to 3 men. Which one was she going to go with? Anybody? Let's say she was widowed twice, and then she married the third one, and then she became widowed again. Which one does she go with? Anybody want to guess? Anybody?
I'm guessing the last husband who she was
Very
married
good,
to.
Charlotte. Excellent. Very good, Charlotte. Charlotte, he says the last one. Why? Because it's like she was divorced from the first 2 ones. So therefore, you might want to think about this if you're in that situation. If you're that, but I wouldn't take it literally. Let me just say, I wouldn't take any of these ideas literally. They're just trying to. We don't know what's going to happen, but they're just trying to give some direction. That the Rasag writes. Different explanations. I certainly wouldn't take any of this literally. I think they're just trying to highlight certain issues about it. Okay. So now, okay. So let's go to chapter 1, verse 15. So here is the discussion of Moshe Rabbeinu has this discussion of where he picks the proper judges. And how does he pick them? It says, I took the heads of your tribes, Anashim, Chachamim, wise men, Viduim, who are known, and I will place, I made them heads over you. Sarei Alafim, Sarei Meot, Sarei Chamishim, Sarei Asor, I made officers over 1,000, over hundreds, over 50, over tens, and officers. What does it mean? I'll make them leaders over you. Rashi says here, shetinhagu ba'em kavod, that you should act with them with honor. Rashim b'memkach, Rashim b'memchar, Rashim b'masa v'mata. And they should put them first when it comes to business dealings. And also they should come into the house last and go out first. You basically treat them with honor. So this is what Rashi says, but our Sefer here quotes the Midrash Rabbah, and he's quoting this as halacha. This is what he said. Says Ve'atein otam rashim alechem. I'll take these. He says basically it's the idea of giving honor to Torah scholars. He says I'll make them heads above you. Made from here you learn shetinhog bo minhog. Excuse me, that you should act there with the practice of nisius. You should treat the Torah scholar as like your prince. You should stand in front of him and give him in every manner of respect. You treat him with respect. La'timo l'kol davar shebigdua. Amar Rabbi Abba Kohen Bar Papa. Kishayiti ro'eh siya shel b'nei adam. When I would see, he says, so Rabbi Abba the Kohen, the son of Bar Papa. So even in addition to him being a rabbi, he was also a Kohen. We also have an honor to responsibility to honor and respect. He said, when I would see a whole caravan of people coming, I would travel in the opposite direction. Why? Hold on. I would travel in the opposite direction. I didn't want them to see me and stand up before me. When I said it to Rabbi Yossi Bar Zvida, he said to me, he said, no, you have to walk in front of them. You want them to see you, and you want them to stand up before you. And you'll bring them to have greater fear of heaven, because it says, when you get up before an elder, so if you get up before an elder, and then you'll fear Hashem your God. So he said, you're doing the wrong thing, because when they honor you, they're honoring basically, the only reason why they're honoring you as a Torah scholar is because is because what you represent Torah. And it says in the verse, if you do this, you're going to come to fear of God. So by denying this, you're denying that idea from them. Okay. Okay, the next one that the next verse I wanted to comment on, the next halacha, comes to chapter 1, verse 16. And this is the idea of a convert. This is about the laws of a convert. That how does somebody convert? The person to convert needs a cord of three. What's the source? One of the sources for this is from this verse. It says in chapter 1, verse 16, I'll command your judges at that time, saying, listen amongst your brothers, and you should judge righteously between a man and his brother and between Gero. Gero is either it can mean a convert, it can also mean a non-resident. So the Gemara in Yevamos, which is of the two main pages in the Talmud that discuss the process of conversion, are Yevamos Mem Zayin and Mem Ches. It says we learn from here. So from here, Rabbi Yehuda said, Ger shenaskar v'bezdin harei ze ger. If there's a convert who converted in a court, he's considered a convert. But if you convert by himself, you're not a convert. So from here we see a very, very important law. You might think, well, why can't I just say I'm Jewish? Why do I need to have a whole process? Why can't I just say I'm Jewish? They say, no, this is the verse. The verse says that you need to convert before a court of three. If you don't convert, you just convert by your own, just go into the mikvah on your own and say, hey, I'm Jewish. That's not sufficient. There was an incident, Ma'isa v'echad, says the Gemara. There was an incident that one person came before Rabbi Yehuda and he said, he said, I converted by my own. I went into the mikvah on my own. I went down to Rock Creek Park. I immersed and now I'm Jewish. It says Rabbi Yehuda, Yeshucha Edim. Says, you have witnesses? He says, no. Says, Yeshucha Banim. He says, do you have children? He says, yes, I have children. So what do you think he said? He said, I believe you to disqualify yourself. You're no longer Jewish, but I don't believe you to disqualify your children. So ironically, your children are Jewish, but you are not Jewish. That's the Gemara. Okay. Anyway, it's a very interesting ruling. Very interesting ruling. Okay, fine. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so now here's another verse. Actually, ironically, this is a verse we also added in Daf Yomi. If you go to chapter 2, verse 6, it says in chapter 2, verse 6, this is something we discussed at length in the Daf Yomi this past week. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu said to the king of Sichon, it says in the verse that we traveled, it says chapter 2, and we went to Har Seir, and God said to me, saying, go north. And the people command, saying, you're going through the borders of your brothers who are dwelling in Seir. You should be very careful. Don't incite them to war. You could buy food from them, take the food with money, and eat it. And water you could buy from them and drink. The Talmud says from here, we learn, Talmud tries to suggest that this is the source for the idea of what's called food that needs to be cooked by that food that's cooked by a non-Jew is not kosher. Because of the idea is it needs to be like water. In the end, the Talmud says this is not a literal verse, it's what's called an atzmach, it's just a support from the Bible. And the Talmud has three major leniencies with respect to being allowed to eat food that's cooked by a non-Jew. You can eat food that's cooked by a non-Jew under three circumstances. If these circumstances don't apply, if any of these three circumstances apply, if even one of them applies, then you can eat the food. But if you don't have any of them, then the food that's made by the non-Jew is considered non-kosher, even if the ingredients are completely kosher. What are the three? The three are, first of all, it needs to be something that cannot be eaten raw. So if the non-Jew gives you food that could be eaten raw, let's say an apple, but he cooked it, he baked it, then you're able to eat it. So then the prohibition of food cooked by a non-Jew does not apply. Number two is it has to be food capable of coming on the has to be food that is capable of worthy to go on the table of a king. So it has to be food capable of going on the table of a king. And if it's not that, meaning like if it's fast food, then it also doesn't apply. And the third thing is that if a Jew is involved, even according to Ashkenazim, even just throwing a match into the fire, in any way adjusting, in any way, even a very small, insignificant way in part of the cooking process, then this prohibition also doesn't apply. The Rashi in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah has two reasons for this prohibition of food cooked by a non-Jew. One of the two reasons Rashi gives, the first reason Rashi gives is because maybe the non-Jew will serve you non-kosher food. Maybe you can't trust him completely. Maybe if he starts serving you food in general, maybe next time I'll give you non-kosher food. So it's a fence to prevent us from eating the non-kosher food. A second reason that Rashi gives is that maybe you will, if you start eating with the non-Jews without putting up any restrictions, so to speak, or any fences on that area, that could come to, God forbid, lead to you marrying your intermarriage, and that's extremely problematic. So, okay, so that's the concept there. So, hold on one second. Let's go to the next one. So now the question, going back to the discussion of chapter 1, verse 17, it says in the verse, the next halacha that I want to discuss is, it says, Lo takiru panim b'mishpat, you're not allowed to show favoritism and justice, kakaton, kagadol, tishmaun, like the small and the big you shall hear, don't be frightened before any man, because the justice is for God. Difficult thing amongst you should bring to me and I will hear. So there's a lot of halachos that we learn from this as it relates to justice, to judging. There's many halachos. So we learn from here, first of all, the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that a judge should not show signs of love or hatred to any of the litigants. You shouldn't say, "Oh, I like you" or "I don't like you," because that's going, even if you're judging equitably, that's going to intimidate. We also learn from here a very important halacha that kakaton kagadol tishmaon, that says Reish Lakish, like small and great you shall hear. Says Reish Lakish, din shel pruta kedin shel mea. Let's say you have a case that involves a small claim, like $1, and you have a case that involves $1 million. The judge has to treat both of them with the same amount of love. Meaning to say that, and let's say there's a case that comes before you for $1, and then afterwards there's a case that comes before you for $1 billion. You're not allowed to say to the case of $1, I'm going to push you to the side so I could deal with this more important case because it's worth a lot more money. That's against the Torah. It's a biblical prohibition. You are allowed to say to if one of the cases is less involved, less complex, You're allowed to say, even though the other one came first, I'm going to push that aside so I can deal with the less complex one first and then deal with the second one. Also, kakadon, kagadol, the Avos Rabbi Nathan says that one person shouldn't be standing while the other one is sitting. One person shouldn't be speaking and the other one, you shouldn't allow one to speak and the other one abbreviate his words. You have to give everybody equal time. And the Avos Rabbi Nathan said both of them you can force both of them to sit, but you can't have one sitting and one hearing because that's going to be unequitable. And finally, we'll say one more thing. He says, so this comes from the Tosefta Masechet Sanhedrin. It says, you're not allowed to be afraid of any man. It says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Minayin, how do we know Shemaya Yoshev Lefnei Dayan? Let's say you're sitting before a judge. You're sitting before a judge, and you know a merit for a poor person or something that's going to convict a wealthy person. You're not allowed to be quiet. You're not permitted to be quiet. How do we know that? Because the verse says, you're not allowed to be quiet. If you see an inequity in the law, you're not allowed to be quiet. That's a biblical prohibition. You have to speak. You have to speak under those circumstances. Okay, I'll stop here. I'll take any questions about Parshas Devarim. Any questions?